Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here with you today. And I really could not think of a better time to talk about the intercultural learning affordances of domestic study than in the middle of a global pandemic. So I think this is a very timely and important set of thoughts that we can sort of engage in together as we think about if we could enhance students in intercultural learning without actually taking them across geopolitical borders. So that is my whole idea. And I want to say sort of first off that the thinking on this is definitely not my own. There is a continuing and emerging body of literature that deals with intercultural learning that happens at home, and often will be called domestic off-campus studies. Sometimes will be simply called study away. The terminology is evolving a little bit, but there's definitely a growing interest in it. And it's particularly an interesting pedagogy because it often sits at the intersection between multiple high impact practices. So you can look for intercultural learning from things such as service learning, from internships, from practicums, from undergraduate research. All of those can be places where intercultural learning can take place. But I thought I would start by thinking about, I'm going to go to the next slide, why you might actually want to cross borders at home. And we're actually going to be on slide 9.
Sorry.
It's okay. We put everything in one slide deck just so we'd have it, for the future. There we go. There we go. Yeah. And so there's a couple of good reasons to think about why you might ask students to cross intercultural borders while remaining in their own country. And if I had to summarize all of them, I think it would be that it just avoids some complications. So it avoids complications, probably importantly having to do with equity, with the idea that study that crosses geopolitical borders is not available to all students, right? So there can be citizenship and visa issues, which are present and matter. There can be economic issues. We actually deal with that one more than we do most of the other issues that would affect students' choices to study abroad. I won't say it's easy to find money to give to students, but we do make the effort to find the money to give to students in some cases to do that. And then there are issues with just the time being away, and these can be created by the university or they can be attributes of the student themselves. So for example, if you have a very regimented degree sequence where you have to take certain classes in certain orders, and in some cases this is even linked to accreditation, it can be difficult for students to take a full semester away from their studies in order to go and participate in an overseas location where perhaps most of the courses that are offered are more of your, maybe your core courses tend to be, largely things that take advantage of the local culture. So literature courses, history courses, foreign language courses, those are all important courses, but for some students, their professional aspect of their degree carries all the way throughout. And I'm thinking in particular, students in education and students in engineering are known to have issues with going away for that period of time. So crossing borders at home, getting the same learning without the travel can be really valuable for them. And then the final one is that it's actually useful to understand your own environment, to think about the cultural borders that exist right where you are. Some of the important work that's been done in this has been in the field of education, where emerging teachers are going to need to be able to cross those cultural borders in their own classrooms. So they need to understand the ones that are right there in their own community. And so it can actually be a superior choice for them. Okay, so we can go on to the next slide. And you can see that crossing borders at home can actually, in some cases, improve the intercultural learning. And there can be a couple of different reasons for that. The first is that it can be contextually relevant. If you are understanding engineering and you're understanding engineering according to US building codes, for example, you can be providing an important contextual aspect of the learning. So even something like building codes will have cultural reference that go along with it, right? Which people we value and how we build the buildings and places where we're going to put them, for example. And you can address those sort of more naturally in a home environment. And the other is the idea of focus. And so although studying across geopolitical borders is seen as valuable because it sort of builds in that disorienting dilemma for students, right? That they have to, people don't think the same way that I do here. People don't speak the same language. They don't eat the same things, all of those kinds of things. That is all true. And that can be something that actually gets in the way of high quality reflection about the effect of the culture on the person. And we saw this kind of throughout Mind the Gap, the idea that off-campus experiences can be somewhat additive. I think some of this is because your first off-campus experience, you're learning how to navigate a culture, and then you can learn other lessons once you've learned that, right? It gets easier. That's a skill you develop, and as you get that with time, you learn more from subsequent examples. If you are dealing in a program where you don't have the time to have multiple examples for that, learning at home can provide enough of a disorienting dilemma to think about, but enough familiarity to actually deal at a higher cognitive level with that, because sort of your world hasn't been rocked quite so much. Let's go on to the next slide. When you think about domestic off-campus study, what does that look like? It looks like a lot of different things, just like study abroad is now developing a myriad of options, right? So there's faculty led, there's short term, there's long term, there's centers where you're cohorted with people. You have that same kind of variety available to you doing domestic off-campus study. So some examples would include go on your own programs like the National Student Exchange, which lets students go and spend a semester away at a different university in their same country. I remember when I was an undergraduate myself, I had a friend for a semester who had come from New Hampshire and went to school in South Carolina for a semester just to see what it was like in the US South to do that. And you can do that in multiple states, but there are those kinds of programs where you go on your own. So you enroll and you manage most things about your life on your own and those kinds of things. You can have faculty-led domestic off-campus study programs. We at Elon have a few of those that we operate in our winter term courses. And so you can actually have a center program. So for example, we have students who will go and spend a summer or a semester in Los Angeles. And some of them are students who are really interested in the entertainment industry, and some of them are not, but they end up learning a lot about a different part of the country by living in a city where they actually have a faculty director who is there, who is teaching some of their classes, who is helping them to navigate the culture, all of those kinds of things. So again, those can be short-term, they can be long-term, but you can't have faculty-led programs and even centers. Big US cities tend to be where those are housed. So there are music industry ones in Nashville, there are finance-oriented ones and theater-oriented ones in New York City, LA for entertainment, Washington, DC for politics, those kinds of things. So there are centers that can be faculty-led that students can go to. There are also what I call sort of your multi-hip programs, your multiple high-impact practices that come together, can still be domestic off-campus studies. So co-op would be an example of that, right? Where a student will go away for a semester or several semesters, some cases, depending on the university, of their undergraduate years and actually work out in the field. Service learning, which can be done both short and long term in one's own country. Research fellowships might be another example of this, but there are programs that sit at that intersection of off-campus study and other high impact practices. And then you can do domestic off-campus study off of your own campus, but still in your same community. And that can actually be very useful and powerful when you can get that to work, because you can get the students to think about, so we're going to practice understanding the differences in culture that are existing in the very city where I'm living and going to school. And that might be something that as they leave the university and go off into the field, they're then better able to do that in communities that they would enter. All right, so we'll go on to the next slide if we can. Some of the pitfalls of domestic off-campus study. Probably the biggest one is that students will carry assumptions with them. As they're going into a culture that they feel like they already understand, they will tend to minimize the effects of the culture when they look at it. It can be hard to fully engage with a culture that is similar to your own to see the similarities and differences. It's not to say that it can't be done, because it most definitely can, and it can be done very powerfully, but it can be more difficult to do. That can be a challenge. Some of the other issues that you can have are the amount of time that you spend in the place. So for example, in the chapter, I talk about some work that we did with actually going about 5 miles away from campus to a local food bank, which ended up being very impactful for the students who participated in that. But the amount of time that we actually spent at the food bank was not really all that great, right? So out of a 24-hour day, if the students spent 3 hours at the food bank out of the rest of it, then they were not perpetually dealing with the differences in culture that they were seeing. You can also see issues with technology. You will also see this in study abroad, but it is easy for students to take their devices and to essentially see their experience off campus, maybe as a detached filmmaker would, and that causes them to not engage as much. So that can be an issue as well. And then there are partnership issues, particularly well, when you have the multi-hip kind of practices where you have somebody who is sort of an understood authority in your culture that you're dealing with, right? So that might be like a community partner coordinator at an off-campus agency. That might be a boss or a research supervisor in a co-op or an undergraduate research setting. And oftentimes those people may be more similar to the college students than the population that they're dealing with. And sometimes if they only deal with those people, then they get kind of misshapen lessons about what it is that they're seeing and what they're dealing with. And so finally, we'll just go to my last slide, which is sort of my central lesson for today. I believe that domestic off-campus study can be a great opportunity. It does help overcome some of those pitfalls, and it might be a necessary opportunity as we are living in a pandemic right now, right? That if you want to teach those lessons, you might be needing to find and take advantage of those options. But just as with any type of global learning, if you want cultural learning, you need to plan to have cultural learning. You need to teach so that students recognize that cultural learning is happening. And you need to provide space for reflection on those cultural issues, because what you do not teach, students tend to not learn in a good way.